So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am, my skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it's used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What do you do for all this?
Oh, well, hello, my friends. Welcome to UFO Classified. I'm your host, Erica Lukes. Happy to be here on a springy night in Utah. Of course, it's been a highly, we've got a lot of action going on in the UFO world. This week, we've seen reports on Fox News and CNN and ABC News. And we've got a lot to talk about. And I'm really looking forward to speaking with my guest this evening about it. I want to thank all of you for getting in chat, for asking great questions, for being a very courteous and grounded group of people. I appreciate it. I love the people that listen to my show. And for me, having a show like UFO Classified is a great way to bring a community together and to get out good information, to ask serious questions, to make sure that people are respected and that we're moving forward in a positive direction. I have spent, of course, another wonderful week with the Ann Druffel files, looking through things and just sitting there with my jaw on the floor because I'm in absolute awe of everything that I have, that I'm in charge of taking care of, preserving, and getting out to the public. I'm excited to talk to my guest again this evening about that and many other things. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring Rob Swiatek on, who has been on the show before, and I want to give you a little bit of info about him. He has had a curiosity about space, aeronautics, UFOs all of his life. He was launching rockets as a small boy, worked as an intern at NASA during college, and then he continued to increase his knowledge of conventional space vehicles as well as unconventional UFOs. He has a degree in physics and earth science that paved the way for a career at the U.S. Patent Office, where he is a physics examiner in aerospace technology. He has lectured, given numerous conferences, and has been involved with the Fund for UFO research, and I mean, all of it's really cool things. We're going to talk to him a little bit more about that, but he has also served on the board of Mufon since 2004, and he and his wife, Sue, live in Virginia. And so first of all, Rob, thank you for coming on here, because I'm sure that there are people on the board of directors of Mufon that are probably going, don't go on our show.
Well, thanks for having me on, Erica. Thanks for having me on. And I haven't heard any negative comments on anyone on me appearing on your show here. So
we don't know yet.
It might not happen till tomorrow, but it hasn't happened on Friday.
No, I appreciate that. You've always been so gracious and kind to me, and I've really appreciated our conversations about things, because you have a great knowledge of the subject, and you've been there, as I was mentioning before we started the show, behind the scenes, and you really understand the inner workings of a lot of things and people, in the community, and I think that is so cool. I mean, I learn a lot from you.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. I happen to be in some the right spots at the right time, so to speak. When I first started with the Patent Office, the Fund for UFO Research was right in the Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. area, so I was able to link up with, very astute and seasoned UFO investigators. So some of it was blind luck. What can I say?
But blind luck is good sometimes. But I mean, okay. So, and I have to I want to just get the uncomfortable questions out of the way first, because I'm sure
yes, ma'am.
I'm going to want, people, Mufon has been pretty quiet lately, especially after the arrest of Jan Harzan. And so can you give us an update on what's taking place with that and what the organization is doing to move forward after that?
Yeah, well, with regard to Jan, I don't know anything more about him than you could get off, public information that's already out there, put out by, the police department or whatever. He obviously hasn't contacted MUFON since, the day of the day this all came out. I think it was July 14th or something like that of 2020. I think he spoke to Dave McDonald. But Dave McDonald, as you know, you and I spoke, I think, right around that time. Dave McDonald transitioned over as the new director of MUFON. And since that time, things have just sort of gone quite normally, thank God, without any more hair on fire incidents. So we've been able to concentrate on literally what we see as MUFON's business. Putting out the UFO Journal, trying to come to terms with last year not having the conference as a result of COVID, and trying to build up the membership, and in other words, just keep the business, as it were, going. Cases keep flowing into CMS in large numbers, like they usually do, and I think it's all Dave can do to just handle the personnel details of MUFON sometimes, and so that there hasn't been, there hasn't been too much really to report in the nature of amazing or extraordinary news or anything like that. We're counting on having the conference this year in the last week of August, I think it is, and so events are starting to move toward that end, and we're also going to move the headquarters that are technically still in Irvine, California, to Cincinnati here in another month or so. Yeah, so that physically has to occur. We have a lease that it's pretty hard to break a lease without paying a lot of money. So that's continued to roll on, and I think we're going to be out of that lease pretty soon. But the office is moving by a little bit before the beginning of summer. So that again is going to take up a lot of time, at least on the headquarters staff. But I know it's a mundane report, but if you have any more specific questions, I'll certainly try to answer them. But there's not a whole lot more I can add that.
No,
it's
thank
too
you.
Exciting.
Yeah, no, I mean it's and I'm sure for everyone that worked with Jan over the years that kind of blindsided everyone, obviously, and so I'm sure there was a degree of just trying to figure out what to do and pick up and, like you said, move, relocate. And so what happens to what has happened with the people that were on the staff in the Irvine office?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Erica. Yeah, our office manager is a woman named Marquetta, and she's a real jewel, and does a yeoman's job there running that office in Staves in Cincinnati, and I think she has one assistant there, or one or two people that also work part-time in the office. But to my knowledge, none of those people are going to be able to make the move to Cincinnati. And so Erica, Marquetta can't make it. So we'll continue to keep in touch with her, and perhaps we'll be able to knead her into the MUFON processes as time goes on. But we're going to have a new office manager for the office in Cincinnati, of course, and I think Dave has someone in mind that he's training and breaking in now. So the physical transition should be pretty smooth.
Do you think maybe moving things out from Irvine to Cincinnati, you could drop the Elaine Douglas files off to me?
Douglas file.
Airdrop.
I will say this, Erica, and the files will be maybe a little closer to you when they're in Cincinnati, though I don't know. You may be midway between the 2 points now as it is, but I don't. The offer was out to you before to come by and peruse them at any time you wish. Set up a time with Dave, and maybe I'm putting words into his mouth that I shouldn't be, but that was the offer with Jan, and I don't know why you couldn't come out and go through those files. So that's all I have to say on that. If I don't have a Mufon board job, on Monday, this will be the reason.
Oh, well, you know what? That would be awesome. And I know that it is a difficult thing. And I had a lot of interactions with Marquetta, and I really admired how, she puts her head down and does a lot of really hard work trying to keep things together. And so I wish her the best, and the people on the staff there. It's just one of those, it's a tough time, for lots of different reasons. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting back to the Elaine Douglas files, I know at one point in the past, I had a conversation, not necessarily on your show, but where I tried to characterize the files, as it were, for you. And there weren't a hell of a lot of them there. It's not like the Andruffo files, I'm sure, are voluminous, but the Elaine Douglas files constituted 5 or 6 boxes, maybe, of the kind of boxes that copy paper comes in. They weren't tremendously huge, let me put it that way, so that in the course of an hour or so that I had to go through them after the meeting ended and before dinner started, I was able to get the gestalt of them, let's put it that way. I didn't see anything there tremendously earth-shaking or, wow, I can't believe this is in here, this should never come out type stuff. I saw a lot of things that I had been involved with in the fund, because Elaine used to come to fund meetings, so she had notes on those things, and a lot of the ongoing things in the UFO field that occurred back in the earlier years of this century when Elaine was still active. But I just didn't see anything that would, neither, I don't think you or I would characterize as earth splitting or earth shaking or anything like that.
Well, and you know what? It was, it's an interesting thing, because I do know that there was a person that visited the files before they got transferred to Mufon. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that person probably took the good stuff. Because when I was, when all of this was going on, and I had talked to Marilyn, she had told me the kind of the contents and how much was there. And so it certainly has shrunk from when it got to the headquarters and stuff, which is unfortunate, because I think there is, probably some really good information out there, and hopefully it will see the light of day. And so, and I appreciate your, going down there and looking at it. And you've always, like I said, you've always been very forthright and very good to me. And I appreciate that a lot, because that we should be more like that in the field. So,
well, we do need as researchers as much collegiality and as much transparency as we can muster up. And again, if someone sanitized or cherry picked those files before they got to MUFON, how would any of us, at least in the headquarters and on the board, ever know about that? We just wouldn't. So yeah, you're probably right in what you say.
Well, it will be an unsolved mystery.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so what, with the big transfer and stuff, and that is going to be a big, exciting move. What, are there any plans to digitize the Len Stringfield files?
I haven't heard about that lately, though it did come up, and all I can say is, with regard to that, it's not my decision to make, and I will say that the files have been digitized because it was done early on. I think they were digitized while Dave was in his first stint as director, because having them in these notebooks, if something were to happen to the notebooks, water leaks on them, or a fire occurs, God forbid, or someone just walks off with them or something, there would be no way of ever getting them back. So they are all digitized. They just haven't been disseminated publicly, and I think that will happen ultimately. But I honestly don't know, and haven't heard anything recently about that aspect of the files.
That's good. I mean, I didn't know that, and that's great. That's great news.
Yeah. So that's where that matter stands now. And I don't even know physically where the files are now. I would assume maybe they were moved to Cincinnati early on after Jen left as executive director. But or international director, but I don't know that for a fact.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I want it for people who are kind of new to all of this. Can you give a little explanation of who Len Stringfield was and what Mufon has, the great collection that you have of his work?
Yeah, I'll try to answer both those questions. Len Stringfield was a first generation UFO researcher, Erica, as I'm sure you probably know, and he was active in the mid 50s at least, when he formed an organization called CRIFO, CRIFO. I forget what it stands for now. Civilian Research into Investigation of Flying Objects or something like that. But anyhow, he had that publication, and he continued to be a very astute and good researcher right up through NICAP and then into the days of Mufon, when Mufon came on the scene in the late 60s. Len was associated with both those organizations, and he wrote a number of books, and he obviously got involved in the crash saucer milieu in the late 70s, and he continued his researches not only into crash saucers but also into abductions and sighting reports. Those never left his mind as an area of interest. Right up to almost when he died in 1994, he was still in communication at that time with the Fund for UFO Research, and I think even gave him a couple small grants to further his research in the early 90s. But he had a long run in the 50s through 1994. And also, I believe he had a pretty good sighting in the Pacific during World War II. And he must have written about that in some of his own publications, but that is also part of the literature, this almost like a Foo Fighter kind of a sighting that he had. Years after he died, it just so happened that some of his files almost literally fell into the hands of Mufon. He had extensive files, and when he passed away, those files stayed with his family. None of them were released, and in a certain sense, they haven't been released to this day, except for this cache of notebooks, I will characterize them as. And I think a description of it was published in the Mufon Journal some years ago, but these are notebooks, and they were notebooks that were basically kept by a secretary, a friend of his, a woman who each day either worked for Len in some capacity or he paid her, and she was sort of very familiar with the UFO field, and she would type up almost like a journal what Len did each day and where he went and what he had to say. And included in these journals were newspaper clippings and letters, and they'd sort of be combed into these files, so that when all was said and done, there's something like, I might have the number a little bit wrong, but it's something like 68 notebooks or whatever. Wow. And they're not 8.5 by 11 size notebooks. They're the smaller size. I saw them once, but I think they might be like 5 by 7 or that type thing. And they're all sort of uniform. So they're literally bound kind of volumes, and they all fit into several boxes. However many boxes fit 68 of them, I guess. But these notes are all typed up. This woman did a really spectacular job, and that's what comprises the so-called Len Stringfield files. The rest of his documentation, which is to say letters that he received and reports that he wrote in the 1950s and the early 1960s and through the 70s, they're, as far as I know, still with his survivors, his grandchildren, and whatever close family members are still alive. His wife has died, so we're talking about the generation now beyond that, grandchildren maybe, and all attempts to try to get those files have failed. Wow. If they still exist. And the family for years claimed that, and Len himself said that certain files should never be released because he promised people he would never release their names and details of what they had to report to him. But that's now some 50 years in the past. And anyhow, if the family adheres to his wishes and they said they're never going to release those files, then you might as well just destroy them. I mean, if they're never going to come out, you might as well just burn them then. Then they won't come out. But every once in a while, somebody from the family drops a teaser that, oh, the files are available or something. But every time such a lead was followed up by anybody, it came to naught. So we're just left with these notebooks, which in and of themselves are pretty interesting.
Oh, I bet they're fascinating. And you know, this is a great question and something that I've been, I'm talking to different people about. I mean, there are, you look at Jacques Vallée and his files and the fact that they're going to a university and that he has stipulated that they can't be released for 10 years after his death. And,
wow.
And, which I find interesting, and I would love to know why, the thought process on that. But when you have files like this, how do you, and you've got, they're 50 years old or whatnot, how do you release it all? How do you know what to release? Because there are people too that want to, there are certain icons in the subject, in the field, and for whatever reason they don't want to put forward all of the information about these people in fear of maybe the subject losing some of its credibility, which, whatever.
Yeah.
But is that a good thing to not, to cherry pick what is going out to the public, and how do we make that decision? Are we, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's no doubt that's a difficult decision, and I don't think there's necessarily one answer that fits all situations. And there's morality involved here too, and a sense of right and wrong. That's why I've always thought that like I said, at least with respect to the Stringfield files, beyond the notebooks, I've never, of course, seen those other files. Richard Hall did and knew about them, but I've never seen them. But anyhow, if his family and Len said these files should never be released, then destroy the damn things. Then follow his wish. Then just destroy them. And this might sound harsh to some people listening, but if you're just going to tease people with, they might come out, and I don't know if then I don't know what to say. Then I don't know how we can deal with that situation. If we ever got the files, I suppose some kind of judgments would have to be made as to whether the subjects of some of these files were still alive, and if they didn't want their names coming out, then we'd have to not let them come out. Maybe just report the details of the sightings. But to me, I honestly don't like opaqueness or non-transparency. I like files whether they're government files or whether they're personal files, to be as small as possible with respect to classified material. And, if there's some things you just can't release, okay, that's fine, but just try to minimize it. And so your question's not an easy one to answer. Right. And I can't, I guess, take it beyond that. And if we ever get those files, then we'll have to have that discussion in earnest. That's all I can say.
Right. And it's a layered thing. You have so many considerations, I think there. But what I'm kind of finding, which is very interesting, as I look through things is and do some research, is that Donald Kehoe was quite racist. And, I think that some of these things and the way that he didn't want to hire a person of color in NICAP and things like that, to me, that is like, whoa, that's, shouldn't that information, I would think that type of thing with regard to somebody should be put forward, because right now we're seeing such a problem with racism especially in the topic of, in the UFO community. We know that, when you go to a conference, the majority of people there are white, men in their 70s,
Well,
and there is a unfortunately there is an undercurrent of racism, as you know, you've seen with some of the things that have happened with particular people at Mufon, you know, releasing statements that probably should be, you know, kept off the internet and things. But I mean, what do you, because I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I have some pretty definite thoughts on that, because it's a subject that I've had discussions with some of my colleagues over the years. I don't know hardly anything about the keyhole racism stuff. It was alluded to a few times by people, but I'm not, obviously, I don't know how to characterize it. Was it a lot of racism? Was it a little bit? I don't know. So I'm just I'll keep my mouth shut on that. With respect to the consist of people who come to UFO events, I can't say that I've never experienced any overt racism that's institutionally based in the UFO field. In any large organization, and I would say, for the purposes of this discussion, maybe a large organization would be an organization like MUFON, 300 or 400 people, or even smaller organizations, maybe 100 people. But it doesn't matter what the field is. It could be UFOs, it could be dentistry, it could be animal husbandry, whatever it might be. If the field is large enough, you know, you're always going to get some people in there who are racist, or I don't like this nationality or these people, and it's not just white people, and it'll cut both ways. In any large enough group of people, those kind of folks are always going to be there, unfortunately. And MUFON is not an exception to that. Each time someone has put something up on the web page or their Facebook page that's racist or you know, derogatory towards somebody or a group of people, that's been dealt with, but they've all been individuals. They haven't taken their marching orders from anybody in headquarters, and I will staunchly defend MUFON on that score. It's impossible to weed out all the bad eggs from an organization. Now, as to why there aren't more blacks coming to UFO conferences, I honestly don't know why that is. But one thing I know is not the reason. It's they are not being looked down upon, or there's no, again, overt racism in any respect with respect to the organizations who are holding these conferences, be it, you know, NICAP or APRO in the day, when the fund held them, when MUFON held them. I don't know. I can say that there aren't a lot of Hispanic people coming either. There aren't a lot of Asian people coming either. I don't know why the subject doesn't seem to intrigue them, and there are now a lot of women involved in ufology, and to a certain extent, that's always kind of been the case. Maybe they weren't in prominent leadership positions, though sometimes they were, but they were always there. And yeah, we would like younger people coming by, but again, it's some of it has to do with the times. People don't come to conferences as much, even absent COVID, and they like to do things online. They like to read free things online, so they don't subscribe to newspapers or journals as much as they used to. I don't know why more younger people aren't intrigued by what UFOs constitute. I don't know why people who are say in engineering or in the sciences who are black aren't intrigued by the UFO phenomenon. Sometimes they are, but again, blacks are 13% of the population. And what percentage of the population are UFO aficionados? A hell of a lot less than 13%. 1% maybe who actually get involved. Mm-hmm. So you're talking even about then a smaller percentage. Most people in general aren't even intrigued by UFOs of any nationality or race. So the question is a very complicated one, and I don't like using the word nuanced all the time, but it is kind of nuanced. And again, it doesn't have one easy snap answer like, oh, it's racism. No, it isn't racism. So I would love to see a whole flock of all kinds of nationalities come into UFOs, because that only means that we're going to put more minds to this subject and start to unravel it all to even faster than we're currently doing.
It is a very very interesting topic, and thank you for broaching it with me, because I've been, the more I look into things, and the more I kind of step back and look at different groups that are involved in ufology and look at it historically, the more I am seeing, unfortunately, these kind of ties to, the Nazi sympathizers, people that are promoting hate, or people that are, standing and getting selfies with the Proud Boys at the Capitol insurrection, and things like that. And so it's I think that we haven't looked at this topic and really addressed it with regards to the UFO community. And I think that's something that needs to be, done. And I think in order for us to really move forward and to kind of separate the political ideas, religious ideas, things like that, different, belief systems, and trying to get that out of the topic of the UFO community, because we want to do research. We want to look at this objectively. And so how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, again, I can't say, coming from a scientific point of view, that I know the answer to that question. You don't tolerate it when you encounter it. That's about all I can say.
Yeah, thank you.
Sometimes UFOs verge into religion because at a certain point there's an intersection, like a Venn diagram or something, where the two circles come together. So you almost, it does come up, but it should be dealt with in you think a calm kind of a manner. You can have a discussion as to whether UFOs are visions of religious visions. Is it something that, is it demonic or what have you? And we ought to be able to have a rational discussion on that. I mean, I personally don't think it is that, but there are people who do, and some of those people apparently are rather high up in some government intelligence and defense agencies. They do see a spiritual side to UFOs, even a demonic side to them, and that always sort of bothers me. But I don't know what I can do, what I personally can do about it. Almost nothing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely, it is interesting. I mean, and that's, I guess, the more I look into this and dive in, it's just like, whoa, there's a lot going on here. And so I want to, because I've got a really great group of people in chat who are just completely on fire tonight, and I don't want to neglect them, but they wanted me to ask you, there was some talk about the Mufon files going to TTSA, and I know that TTSA had been kind of putting out the feelers and trying to get stuff. Can you answer that?
Yeah, I can. The Mufon files are not going anywhere. They're certainly not going to TTSA, and that was never anything seriously considered. I think maybe some people in TTSA would have liked to have gotten the Mufon files, but number one, they weren't for sale, and number two, they weren't going anywhere, and they indeed haven't gone anywhere. So the board is adamant about that, and so that has a pretty clear answer. I will say that with respect, and this sort of ties in with the Stringfield notebooks or the Stringfield files, it's MUFON's intention to ultimately make those things freely available to the public. I don't know when it'll happen. It's not necessarily a high priority item, but that is something that is going to happen. Just like MUFON is now and has digitized its entire collection of UFO cases predating the creation of the case management system, the so-called CMS. And these files, we colloquially refer to them as the Pandora files, but they essentially are cases that were filed before the turn of this century, paper files, and they weren't digitized. Now they have been digitized. So eventually those are going to be made completely available to researchers. Yeah, they'll have the names of witnesses taken out and other people. What can you do? That kind of stuff has been redacted, but nonetheless, the files will be there. And this is sort of a situation that's a providence situation, because it's also occurring at the same time as the Center for UFO Studies is also having its very voluminous files prepared for digitization. And I say that only because in this time of COVID, we can't get the people by to digitize the files now because it's hard to travel and stay for a long time in one place. But the CUFOS files, which also constitute many filing cabinets worth of files, have all been moved to Albuquerque, and there they sit in the archives of Dave Marler. You probably know Dave,
Right? Yeah.
And these files too will be digitized. I'm hoping that process will start this year.
I'm sure knowing Dave. Yeah, I'm sure knowing Dave.
It
will.
And we have people lined up, and so it's just a matter of getting past COVID for that to start. But all these files will be digitized and put out there. So I think it'll be much, there'll just be a lot more available for people to go through as given another year or so, I hope.
And that is so cool. And I like Dave a lot. And in fact, he'll be on the show in the next month, hopefully. But yeah, it's great. And so is there anything, that Mark Roediger has decided to hold back that you know of, or did everything just go to Marler?
To my knowledge, everything went to Marler. Now this doesn't include certain things, and we're splitting hairs here, but not necessarily all the journals. Let's put it that way. They didn't all go, but I'm talking here the sighting files. That's what went to him, and I don't think anything's been cherry picked from them. They're all just there, and they're just going to be digitized. And I don't know how I don't know how witness names and all that's going to be handled. That's I don't know what the answer to that is, but
it's a process.
It's a process, and it may be that when you're talking about files, and again, this is Rob Swiatek speaking, not Mark Roediger or CUFOS, because Mark is really the director of CUFOS. But when you're talking files that date back to the late 60s or the 50s or something, it's already 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago in some instances. Is there really a reason to keep a witness's name redacted at this point?
Yeah.
So that's my feeling on it, and I err on the side of making these things public, if you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and it'll be interesting to kind of see as things progress. And I mean, I will say that it is such a big commitment to. I mean, it takes money to house the files, to get the equipment to digitize it, to get, I mean, there's so much involved in all of this. It's not, an easy thing. And so, I wish the best to Dave and everybody getting that project done. That's awesome. Dave is very organized, and I had the pleasure of speaking in New Mexico at a conference with Dave and Stan Friedman and John Greenwald, and we got to go over to Dave's house after and look at everything.
Oh, wow.
And that was really cool. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and he's a very gracious host, and
yes, he is.
I hope I can, at some point in time, make a journey down there when things settle down with the virus and things. And you and I have also talked about maybe, starting a little thing here where we're meeting with different researchers and archivists, where we can, go through Ann's files and look at the different files, here, in Utah and things. And I can take you guys on a trip. We can go up to the University of Utah Special Archives, and you guys can look at Frank Salisbury's work up there, and maybe take a tour of Skinwalker Ranch. I can put a bag over my head. You're not
all
seeing
disguise
me.
ourselves. Well, I think that should occur, and the more meetings and communication we have, the better. And now these files are starting to build up as some researchers unfortunately pass away, or as collections become available, and we've got to determine what's going to become of them. And even your Druffel files. I mean, maybe when the CUFOS files are done, there's something that Dave could do to help you out with the digitization of Ann's files, or a portion thereof. And he's got some pretty high class equipment there that, again, people have donated their money for him to buy, or donated in some cases the actual equipment. So you might bring this up with him when you speak with him, but that's. The funding is in place, and I don't see any problem there once it gets started.
That's amazing. And I will just throw this out there. If anybody would like to donate equipment to me, please feel free.
By all means. Yeah, they should do that.
It is. It's an expensive pastime or hobby, and things.
Yeah.
And I want to just, there's another question in chat just related to the,
yes, ma'am.
And you're so great to answer all of these. I really appreciate it. With the TTSA files, they just want to kind of clarify, do you guys, are you saying that they didn't come in like kind of the Bigelow thing and then get access to the database? That didn't happen, that you guys just said, no, that's not going to happen? Not to my knowledge, it did not happen, no. Okay. There have been some contacts between TTSA and Mufon, but they haven't amounted to much. That's all I can say, that they just didn't go anywhere. And now TTSA is largely defunct. So it's becoming more of an entertainment organization and less of a research organization. And since the main drivers of the research are now no longer with the organization. So. Yeah, and that's been an interesting thing, which I definitely want to talk a little bit, about after we take a break here in a little bit. But and I appreciate that. And so just another question, how many active field investigators are there now in Mufon? Gee, that's a good question. I always think I've got to memorize that number, but I think it's around 250 or so, Erica. Okay. Something like that. Okay, and then is there any sort of a restructuring where like the state directors will be dismissed and then you'll move to regional directors? There's sometimes is discussion of maybe adding another layer in there, but so far that's not been done. And that's something Mufon actually has had in the past, these regional directors. And every once in a while that idea comes forward again. And I'm not sure that the people who float those ideas know that it's already been tried. But at the moment, we're going to stick with the organizational structure the way it is, with the chief investigator, Doug Wilson, and then state directors and field investigators and chief investigators under them. And at the moment, it seems to be working fairly well. Okay. And I noticed when I was looking at the MUFON website today that Ruben isn't on there anywhere. Ruben Uriarty? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I can't say anything about that. I don't know. Okay. I've always liked Ruben, and I just was kind of like, wow, he's always been on there somewhere, so I just wasn't sure. Yeah, I don't know why that might be. You could query, send an email to MUFON headquarters or send it to me and I'll forward it on to Dave or something like that if you want, asking about that. But I know Ruben a little bit, but I don't know what his current status is vis-a-vis MUFON. Okay, thank you. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. I just saw that, and I was just curious to know that. So I think again, thank you for asking or for talking about some of these issues and questions that people have. That's great. I will say that you are probably the only one that comes out and agrees to talk and answer questions, and I appreciate that about you. Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, I again, with regard to Ruben, I have not heard either of anything, negative involved that he's involved with or anything like that, or he's dismissed or anything. Yeah, I have not heard anything derogatory or anything like that. I assume he's still with the organization. Okay, wonderful. Well, yeah, that's great. I'll have to reach out to him. I haven't talked to him for quite a while, and so he was very awesome to me when I was involved with MUFON and things. And I always have, special people that I met during that time period that I will always, be in touch with because they're pretty cool. So, so thank you. And so let's talk about I want to talk about the Fund for UFO research, because there are a lot of, again, new people that are coming into the subject, and they're getting so caught up in storming Area 51 that they don't understand, about these organizations. And so how did that get started? Well, the Fund for UFO got started in 1979 in the Washington, D.C. area, and it was started by a number of people who had been associated with NICAP. NICAP at that time was still in existence, but it was started by Richard Hall,
Tom Dooley, Bruce Maccabee, I believe, was one of the first ones. John Carlson, and a few other people who had been, like I say, with NICAP, and they decided to start their own organization that was not a membership organization per se, but an organization designed to raise money and then literally spend that money for scientific research in the form of grants to people, to investigators and researchers. And it technically still exists. In fact, I'm still the secretary treasurer of it, and I get the bank statements every month. But it's largely, I won't say moribund, but yeah, nothing's really happening with the fund because most of the principals have died, unfortunately. Richard Hall's no longer alive, and Bruce Maccabee isn't active anymore, although he is still with us. And Don Berliner's still with us, but he's getting fairly elderly, and they don't all live in the Washington area anymore. So we have to decide what's gonna happen with the fund. But that idea of raising money and then soliciting grant proposals, scientific grant proposals that you then fund is still a terrific idea as far as I'm concerned because it works.
Well, and there was, the Fund for UFO Research had quite a lot of money from funding, and at one point in time, where did they solicit the funds?
Well, they came from a lot of different sources. We had a couple of sponsors who, if you needed a larger amount of money, i.e., $10,000 or something like that, for a project, they once in a while would step forth and say, "Okay, here's the $10,000." So we could get sort of those kind of projects might be handled. But for the everyday day-to-day running of the operation, the money came from hundreds of individual donors who donated anything from just $5 to $100 or whatever on a periodic basis. We used to have one fellow here in the Washington area. I never met him. But every month he would send the fund a check for, this was in the 80s and in the 90s, like $600. Wow. And it would just come like clockwork every month. I think it was 600. And I tried to get him to come to a couple of local fund events that we would have, like a Christmas party, so we could just give him our thanks. But I could never induce him to leave. And I even told him, I said, I'll have a cab, or a limousine if you want. Stop by where you live and pick you up and drive you over here. And I was dead serious, and I never met him. But so we had people like that, but hundreds of people like that. And then we would sell. The interesting thing was when people came back with the scientific project, one of the requirements of their getting a grant was that they present us with a report that was capable of being published. That was we called it camera-ready form back then. But they would come out with a monograph or a report, or in some cases a book, that we could then sell to try to recoup some of our costs. And that system worked pretty well too. So yeah, it was a largely successful organization for the time when it was really active.
And so I want to ask you, because I've been, with the Ann Ruffle files and things, I've been reading a lot, about with correspondence with Richard Hall. Mm-hmm. And I would love to know what your thoughts were on Richard Hall.
Well, he was a very close friend. Richard Hall, not only was he a very a sharp and knowledgeable and wise individual, he had an awful lot of integrity and honesty, and that stayed with him in the UFO field throughout his entire career there and in his life in general. He wasn't always the easiest person to deal with, but at heart, his bark was far worse than his bite. And Richard was one of the almost first-generation ufologists who just took a rational, scientific, logical approach to the UFO subject. And he didn't go for Space Brothers stuff at all. He didn't go for too much mystical beliefs and all this kind of thing. It's like he thought we can use science and rational thinking to uncover the truth here. And that's the stance he maintained for all the years that I knew him.
And I mean, he does seem like, I mean, I just from what I've read with his, the correspondence, I mean, I just got the impression that he was very, cared a lot about, cared a lot about the community, our planet. He was very, I think he had a streak in him, from my understanding, that he really cared about a lot of issues with a lot of issues that we should be, all of us should be concerned about, social issues and injustice and things like that. And so am I off base on that?
No, I think you're right. Like a lot of intelligent people who are well read, they take stances on all those things you were referring to, and they're generally well-rounded people. And Dick was not a person who was, just UFOs and you couldn't talk about anything else. He was an avid a horse racing handicapper, for example, and we would get together for all the big races each year at his house to watch them and make some informal bets amongst ourselves. He was an expert on women in the Civil War, and he wrote a book on that, and women who fought as men during the Civil War. It was really incredible. And he and I went to a number of Civil War conferences over the years, and even went to a number of battle sites and in this area here, Maryland, Virginia area, just to tour the battlefield. And he was an expert on the Civil War. And so he was a very complicated man and very had a lot of interests besides UFOs. So that was another intriguing part about Dick you could always count on. Have a great discussion about horse racing,
Yeah, he did, and that's the cool thing. I love learning more about the individual, because this is, all these people put their lives into this, and he died from colon cancer.
Yes.
And that was he was 74?
Dick would have been, he died in 2009, I believe. He would have been 79 that year, so he was 78 when it happened, when he died, yeah. His birthday was on Christmas Day. That's how I always remember. It was on Christmas. And something he never quite got over in his life. But nonetheless, he what can I say? I still miss talking with him, and the absence is still, I still deeply feel his absence, let me put it that way.
Well, that's nice. I mean, just to hear that, because it's cool for me. It's like these people are coming alive on these pages when I'm reading these things, and just knowing that, that he this is his handwritten letter, and I mean, just, it's a very cool, it's an honor for me to have that opportunity to look at this and learn from people and things. And so, thank you for sharing that. And so let's talk a little bit. We've got about 5 minutes before break, and I want to just get into how you first met Anne.
Okay. I wasn't prepared for that that question. But when I became aware of her, it was probably well before I was involved with the Fund for UFO Research, because I was in the late 70s and early 80s. I still was a Mufon member, although I wasn't active with the organization. So I was still reading the journal, and Ann Druffel wrote articles for the Mufon journal, and quite a few of them. So I would have encountered her at least in print, back in the early 70s, probably mid 70s. But over time, she came to the fund for a number of grants, which we gave her. And we worked pretty closely with her. The one really big grant that she got was to digitize all Jim McDonald's reel-to-reel tape recordings and put them onto CDs and in digital form. So we worked very closely with her. But and there were some other projects too. I think one was an abduction project. And so I would have reason to call her up. I would usually be the person who would deal with her, at least be the manager for the fund with regard to grants that we gave to Anne. So I had a lot to do with her in terms of giving her updates on, how the money was going and when your next check would be expected and all this kind of stuff to just keep the research going. So I became pretty good friends with her, and then she would always stop by the fund table at the Mufon symposiums. So I got to know her fairly well.
Oh, I bet that was a kick. She just seems like I mean, I wish I mentioned this before the show started. I wish I could have met her because she just seemed so colorful and smart and driven. And, it was really neat when I got to go to retrieve her archive and to sit at the table, in her home where she would sit and have conversations with everyone and stuff. And I did a radio show from there where I was interviewing Alice Druffel, and that was just, I mean, it was so cool. I'll send you the link because it's like, here I'm sitting in the chair that Anne was sitting when she, for how many years and was talking to this person and just all this stuff. And it's like, I mean, it was almost, I hate to say it, kind of like a little religious experience for me. It's just really cool. So I really, I love hearing about that. And when we get back from break, I want to talk a little bit more about that and some of her, her work in the abduction field and, James McDonald and just some of the things that you can share about her and her life and things. That would be awesome.
Sure.
So thank you. We're going to take a quick break, about a 3-minute break. And again, I want to just thank everybody for getting into chat, for paying attention to the show, for donating to the show to help keep it on the air. You can do that at UFOclassified.com. Pledge your support for the show, for archiving, and you can also pick up some a UFO Classified t-shirt and some cool merchandise, but I usually don't. I'm not good at, shamelessly self-promoting, but I'm trying really hard. But anyway, so there you have it, UFOclassified.com. Anyway, we will take a break, and then we will be back with Rob Swiatek after this.